I remember the first time we met, the energy and joy surrounding us. Steve was charismatic and confident, with eyes full of sincerity and kindness. We first crossed paths at a college art exhibit, where his sharp eye for detail sparked a conversation about brushstrokes and the finesse of oil painting. Our connection was instant, and what began as a casual chat soon turned into countless evenings spent together, sharing dreams of a life built on love and simplicity. We created a life full of laughter, support, and unspoken moments that meant everything. As the years passed, the responsibilities of family life grew heavier. Our days were filled with joy and chaos, thanks to our 3 wonderful children. We treasured the moments, but the demands gradually eroded the time we had for each other. Steve, ever the devoted craftsman, threw himself into his business, bringing pride and exhaustion into our home. Meanwhile, I balanced my career and motherhood, feeling my identity fade into an endless cycle of tasks and sacrifices. As I approached the ship's entrance, my kids waved excitedly. Their happy squeals filled the air, and covering my eyes with my hands, I pretended not to see them. "How did you get here? Surprise, Mommy?" Steve, my husband, said with a knowing smile. "We thought we'd come to see you off," he added. I smiled back at him. "Where's Edna?" I asked. "She's probably already on board," Steve replied. We decided it was best not to try to meet up in all this chaos. The kids clamored for my attention, their voices overlapping in excitement. I crouched down and hugged little Trixie, who at 3 had just outgrown diapers but still had the chubby arms and legs of a toddler. Like her older sister, she was a chatterbox, her lisp making her even more endearing. "Are you going on that big ship, Trixie?" she asked, her wide blue eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Yes, I am," I said, smiling at her. "What are you going to do there?" she pressed. "There's swimming, movies, a gym, and even a cafe," I explained. "So, I'll be quite busy." "I want to go on a cruise with you, Mommy," Trixie said earnestly. "Not this time, sweetheart," I replied, rushing her cheek gently. "But maybe someday we'll all go together," she said. "Okay, Katie," she continued, now tall and slender. "How long will you be gone, Mommy?" It was hard to believe she had looked just like Trixie only 2 years ago. I kissed her small nose. 5 days and 4 nights. I'll be back Friday afternoon. Katie's bottom lip turned into a small pout. No, little angel," I said soothingly. "Everything will be fine. I'll be back before you know it." Charlie, at 8, was my little man. He looked just like me but had Steve's serious, diligent nature. "I'll miss you too," I replied, hugging them tightly. "But Dad will take care of you." Charlie nodded. "I know, but we want you home too." "Oh, I love you all so much," I said, giving them one more squeeze. Trixie and Katie twirled and giggled, while Charlie stood stoic. I stood up and reached for my rolling carry-on. My other suitcase was already on board. As I turned to kiss Steve, I realized he was nowhere to be found. "Kids, do you see Daddy?" I asked, scanning the crowd. Their small eyes searched, but couldn't see through the throng. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes left. My heart beat faster. I called Steve's number, but it went to voicemail. "Steve, where are you? I need to board. Please come back." The kids looked at me, their expressions turning anxious. I forced a smile. "I'm sure he just stepped away for a moment. He'll be back soon." "What are you going to do with Dad while I'm gone?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "We're going to the pool," Trixie said, her eyes lighting up. "Dad said we could go to McDonald's for dinner one night," Katie added. "Oh, did he?" I teased. "Just one night, okay?" Katie giggled, twirling. "We're playing mini golf tomorrow," Charlie said. "Seriously, are you going to win Daddy again?" I asked. Charlie shrugged. "I think he lets me win." My heart ached at his insight. "You still have to make your shots," I said, echoing Steve's usual advice. "If you make your shots, it doesn't matter what Daddy does." Charlie smiled faintly, and I hugged him again. Where was Steve? I scanned the area and noticed 2 uniformed men heading toward the ship's ramp. I hurried over, keeping an eye on the kids. "Excuse me, I have my boarding pass, But my husband hasn't returned yet, and I can't leave my children, I said. Could you wait a couple more minutes? The younger man looked at the older one. We can give you 1 more minute, but that's all, the older man said firmly. Thank you, I said, dialing Steve's number again. Voicemail. My frustration grew. Steve, I'm about to miss the ship. Please hurry. I whispered, trying one last time with no answer. The sailors exchanged glances as I shrugged apologetically. I'm sure he'll be back. He knows I have to, I said. Sorry, ma'am, the older man said. We need to get the ship sailing. I quickly texted, missed the ship, turning back to the kids. I called Steve again. Thanks a lot, Steve, I muttered as the gangplank pulled back. I missed the ship. I hope you have a good reason, I whispered, watching the ship pull away. Disappointment washed over me. My phone buzzed with a text. Oh no, what happened? I replied quickly. Later, I had to be there for my children. I texted back. I gathered them and led them to a shaded bench to wait for Steve. Mommy, aren't you going on the ship? Katie asked. Not today, honey. Why? She pressed. Your dad went somewhere and I couldn't leave you alone, I said. I didn't feel like defending Steve at that moment. Lately, he'd been acting like a real idiot. Some nights, he stayed late at work, and while he tried to be attentive to the kids, he was clearly distracted. Conversations between us were minimal. Instead of spending the evenings with us like before, he would head to Tony's bar or work in the yard until dark. He was also glued to his phone more than usual. One morning, curiosity got the best of me, and I checked to see who he was texting, only to find that he had added a password to his phone. Is he cheating on me? I wondered anxiously. But it didn't seem like Steve. He was always so reliable. Still, something had shifted, and now this. He knew how much I was looking forward to this cruise, a brief break from the never-ending roles of being a mom, wife, employee, daughter, and everything else. 5 days off for myself didn't seem unreasonable. I whispered, recalling how excited he was when I first brought it up in April. But then he threw a wrench in the plans. Katie, can you wait a little longer? I asked after some time. I'm tired, she sighed. I tried calling Steve again, but it went straight to voicemail. My irritation gave way to mounting anxiety. Where could he be? I muttered, not wanting to worry the kids. I kept them entertained with questions and made up games, but eventually, every child reaches their limit, and we had reached ours. Okay, time to head home, I said, standing up. But how, Mommy? Katie asked, looking concerned. We take a taxi, I replied, realizing I didn't have the keys to Steve's car. As I ordered a taxi, I said, it'll be a short ride and the driver won't mind, trying to reassure myself as we waited and then headed home. When we arrived, I called Steve again. Steve, please call me and let me know you're okay. I'm taking the kids home, so come back as soon as you get this. Steve's car was nowhere in sight, though it could have been parked in the garage. If he was home, he was nowhere to be found. The kids were cranky, but quiet as I brought them inside. I put Trixie to bed, hoping she'd nap after the morning's events, though she didn't always. Katie switched on Disney, and Charlie retreated to his room, shutting the door. I left my rolling bag in our bedroom and went to the bathroom, sending a few text messages as I sat. Sorry, Steve. The kids came. He's disappeared. I couldn't leave the children. A sad emoticon popped up in reply. I understand. I responded with my own sad emoji and headed to the kitchen for a snack and iced tea. At first, I didn't notice it, but as I sat at the table, wondering where Steve could have gone, my heart dropped. His phone, with its distinctive silver case, was sitting in the center of the table. I knew it was Steve's, perfectly aligned with the table's edges, showcasing his detail-oriented nature, a trait essential for a top-tier painter. But what froze me was the sight of his wedding ring lying on the dark phone screen. Damn. I rushed to our bedroom and saw that most of his clothes were missing. His tablet was gone from the bedside table, and a glance at the living room confirmed his laptop, and all our files were gone too. It looked like my marriage was over. Tears welled up, but I knew they wouldn't change anything. I also knew Steve was crushed. He wasn't the type to run away, so if he couldn't face me, it was because it would have broken him. Despite everything, I loved him deeply. Steve was an incredible person, a wonderful lover, and a dependable partner who had sacrificed his comfort for me throughout our 11 years together, 9 as husband and wife. He was stubborn and would hyper-focus on tasks, sometimes at my expense, but I still got my way most of the time. I could be impulsive and quick to anger, but he balanced me with his calm, steady nature, which I had needed especially before we had kids. Steve was a talented craftsman. His painting business thrived after a rough couple of years due to his combination of creativity, skill, and responsibility. He now had a waiting list, thanks to glowing feedback. He was also an exceptional father, endlessly patient with our kids. And now he was gone. So, why was I trying to escape on a cruise with Chad Mayberry? I worked as a dental assistant because it allowed me to be there for the kids after school or daycare and be home by 2 p.m. when they got out. Chad started at the office about 10 months ago, during a period when Trixie was in her terrible twos and Katie was adjusting to preschool. She was so affectionate, while Charlie was more reserved but still needed my attention. The demands were relentless. Steve's business wasn't all-consuming, but he often came home tired and distracted. He would perk up for the kids, but by the time we put them to bed, he was spent. I probably was too. We tried to carve out time for ourselves, but it was hard. A monthly Saturday night date felt insufficient, and Xeon Fridays became a routine. Spontaneity was a distant memory. Though we had the life we wanted, it felt stifling. I didn't resent Steve or the kids, but I resented how we lived. I wasn't ready to settle into the predictable life my parents had. Chad, on the other hand, was married but childless. He and his wife seemed to live with more freedom. Both worked in professional fields, Sylvia in sales and Chad in IT. They could afford exciting, frequent trips, often separately. The first time I talked to Chad after his wisdom teeth extraction, he had just come back from hiking the Grand Canyon with his college friends. Meanwhile, Sylvia was in Santa Fe attending an art exhibit with her best friend. Chad had a sharp sense of humor and liked to joke around, even teasing me. I didn't usually eat lunch due to my part-time job, but he would join me in the kitchen for a mid-morning snack. I often talked about my family and sometimes complained about how they took me for granted. I envied his carefree lifestyle, disposable income, and minimal responsibilities. "Let's take a walk tomorrow," he suggested with a smile. "We can go to the beach for lunch and be back in time for you to pick up the kids." That's what we did, and it was a refreshing change from my routine, a conversation with an adult, and no expectations. I didn't have to repeat myself or think of anyone but me. Chad drove, allowing me to relax, and the waiter served me instead of me serving everyone else. I cherished the break, and that night at home with my family felt better than it had in a long time. Steve noticed my smile, and we ended up having midweek closeness for the first time in months. I felt so happy, hugging Steve tightly, almost in tears because of how much I loved him. A couple of weeks later, Chad suggested another lunch, which soon became a regular thing. Most of the time, we would grab a sandwich or salad and chat in the park, but on days when we had no afternoon appointments, we ventured further. I wish I could say Chad pursued me, but that wasn't the case. I let it happen. Still, the outcome was mutual. One day at lunch, he brought up Steve. "I think I spend more one-on-one time with you than he does," he said, glancing at my chest. "Maybe he's tired of my charm." "That would be a shame," he added. "Your charm is considerable," I replied, blushing. "You have your own charm," I said, smirking as I looked at his lap and raised an eyebrow. With that, sex became an unspoken option. Our playful teasing escalated, and I began to see Chad as a potential lover. He was attractive in a striking way. Steve was a tall, lean student with broad shoulders, bright blue eyes, and rough hands. We kept meeting for lunch once or twice a week until a string of cancellations interrupted our routine. "Want to go to the beach?" Chad asked one day, smiling. Instead of going to our usual dockside cafe, he pulled into a motel by the surf. "I'd like to experience your charm," he said, his eyes full of desire. The thought of him excited me, and we ended up having sex. It lasted only one round, but he took his time. It wasn't as great as my best moments with Steve, but it was good enough. We had an hour and a half, which was plenty to avoid feeling rushed. I was surprised I didn't feel guilty. I saw my time with Chad as a break from real life. It didn't affect my marriage except to ease some of my stress. I loved Steve completely. He was my partner for life. Chad was just like a gym session or a relaxing massage. We never made plans for our meetings, letting our schedules and fate decide. During those first months, but soon the practice got busier and patient appointments became more consistent. 6 weeks passed without any opportunities. Then, we started talking about taking a short cruise. This will be a nice break for both of us, Chad said, leaning back in his chair. I brought it up with Steve after the kids went to bed. Honey, Edna from work won a Caribbean cruise for 2, I said. She just broke up with her boyfriend and asked if I'd go with her. What do you think? Steve looked surprised when I mentioned about 6 weeks, the first week of June, for how many days. I hadn't figured that out yet, so I guessed 5 days. I think he nodded slowly. That sounds like a great idea. You've been working so hard. I don't say this enough, but thank you for everything you do for our family. He hugged me with his strong, long arms, making me feel like the luckiest woman. I loved him so much that I led him to our bedroom, and we shared an intimate moment. When I was with Steve, I never thought about Chad. There was no need. Steve was my reality. Chad was just a bit of fun. We picked June so we'd have time to convince our spouses. I chose Edna as my cover because Steve had never met her, and Chad said Jeremy was his alibi. Neither Steve nor Sylvia objected. Looking back, though, maybe 6 weeks was too long. I don't know how Steve found out, but judging by his change in behavior, he figured it out pretty quickly. Once he knew about Chad and me, I wondered if he orchestrated Katie's announcement that they'd be at the dock to surprise me. Chad and I had to board the ship separately. Now, staring at Steve's phone and his wedding ring left behind so deliberately, I felt lost. It looked like I was about to become a single mother with little time for anything but taking care of the kids. If I thought life before was exhausting, I suspected doing it alone would be even harder. Damn, I took a deep breath and started making calls, starting with his brother. Hey, Paul, have you seen Steve today? I asked. No, he replied cautiously. My chest tightened. Was he holding back because he knew, or was I just being paranoid? Okay, thanks. If you hear from him, please ask him to call me. I repeated similar conversations with his parents, his sister Beth, and his cousin, each filled with vague responses that only heightened my anxiety. At one point, the kids came looking for me, so I shifted into mom mode and served dinner. During another meal of macaroni and cheese with baby carrots, their favorite orange foods, Katie suddenly spoke up. Where is Dad? She said. He said he'd be home this week. I forced a smile. Our plans changed, honey, but I'm here now. But where is Dad? Katie pressed on. He always comes home for dinner. I turned to my eldest, hoping for some insight. Charlie, do you know where Dad is? Charlie looked at me seriously and shook his head. No. I believed him. Steve would never involve the kids in adult problems. I managed to smile and steered the conversation toward their summer camps, but inside, my panic grew. After cleaning up and putting the girls to bed, I let Charlie read in his room for an extra half hour. When I finally found some quiet, I wrote an email to Steve and sent it to both his personal and work accounts. My dear Steve, I began, I hurt you deeply, and I am so sorry. I love you, no matter what you may think about my actions. Please come home. I need you, but if not for me, please come back for the children. They're already worried because you missed dinner, and they'll only get more scared the longer you're gone. Please come back to your family. I love you, and only you. I didn't sleep that night, anxiously waiting for an answer. When I received a text from Chad asking how I was doing, I ignored it. By 10 p.m., I forced myself to bed, knowing I needed rest for the sake of my children. The next day, there was still no response from Steve, only a phone call from his sister, Beth. The moment I answered, Beth's voice erupted. What's wrong with you? She demanded. Excuse me, what do you mean? I stammered. My brother might be clueless and forget half of what you ask for at the store because he refuses to write a list, but he's a good man, the best man I know. So, why are you cheating on him? I replied, I don't know what you're talking about. What did Steve tell you? My voice trembled. Steve didn't tell me anything, Beth shot back. Paul picked him up from the drunk tank this morning. He was a wreck, split lip, bruises everywhere. He told Paul that you don't love him anymore because you're cheating with a coworker. My heart sank, shattering for Steve. He had never been one to drink heavily, let alone get into a fight. Oh God, what did he do? What have I done? I whispered. Beth, is he with Paul now? I don't know, Beth replied, her tone harsh and incredulous. But how could you cheat on the best guy in the world? I had no answer. I hung up, my mind swirling with guilt and panic. How could I cheat on Steve? The thought that crossed my mind was that in my eyes, I hadn't. My relationship with Chad felt separate from my marriage. It was nonsense, I knew. A marriage, when right, should be complete and unwavering, no breaks, no temporary escapes. It could be tiring, but that bond shouldn't be broken. Otherwise, you're left with ashes and angry relatives. Now, I finally understood that, knowing I had broken a good man whom I loved. I needed to find him and try to make things right. I called Paul, but he didn't answer. Next, I called Steve's parents. I thought my conversation with Beth was hard, but it was nothing compared to what Steve's mom had to say. Hello, hi Margaret, is Steve there? All I heard was a sob, then silence. Margaret, are you okay? More silence. Are you there, Margaret? A trembling voice finally responded. I was so happy when he found you. I thought you were the best thing to happen to my son. He was so happy, but you were the worst. The line went silent again, and I knew she was done talking. If Trixie hadn't come in asking me to tie a bow on her doll's dress, I might have broken down right there. But I had kids to care for, so I smiled and got through the day. My children were innocent, and I knew I had to protect that innocence as long as I could. This lasted another day. The kids grew more confused and upset about Steve's absence. I finally told them that their dad was staying with his brother. I tried to reassure them that he loved them, but that we needed some time apart. Is Daddy coming home? Charlie asked, looking worried. Of course, sweetheart. We need to talk through some things, but he loves you and your sisters so much. He won't be gone for long. He loves you. I hope so. His response pierced me, and I forced a smile. Sometimes parents fight, and we need to work it out so we can be happy again. But no matter what, we always love you. He nodded seriously and walked away. My heart broke again, knowing how protective Steve's family and friends were of him. My secret remained hidden. Steve was deeply wounded, but no one would give me a clue about where he was. His family and friends, when not dodging my calls, were frozen in silence. No one said anything about him. I left messages with the few people still willing to talk to me, pleading for Steve to call me or at least arrange a meeting with the kids. I only let myself cry when the children couldn't hear, and when I did, it was bitter tears. We had been perfect together, and now that was gone forever. 5 lives were directly affected, with countless others indirectly impacted. It was all my fault. By Thursday night, my hope was gone. I had no more ideas and resigned myself to waiting for Steve to make the first move, wondering how and when I might hear from him. Praying it wouldn't be through a mediator with legal papers, I went to bed feeling more defeated than ever. It was clear that I had no allies among those supporting him. No one spoke about balance, patience, or forgiveness. While I didn't expect forgiveness, I had hoped that maybe there was enough love left for a response, even if it was anger. But all I got was silence. On Friday afternoon, the phone rang. My heart leapt, but it sank when I saw who was calling. I hesitated but decided to face everything on.
Hi, Chad, I said.
Sylvia found out, Chad said bluntly. I got served divorce papers as soon as I stepped off the ship today. I closed my eyes, taking deep breaths to steady myself. Steve left us. I have no idea where he went. Damn, Chad muttered. How did they find out? I don't know, I replied, but I think Steve knew the moment I told him about the cruise. He'd been acting strange for weeks. What happened at the dock was deliberate. He left me with the kids, so I couldn't board the ship. I'm sure he went home, packed his things, and left while we were waiting. There was a pause as I tried to process everything, the silence heavy between us. How are you holding up? Do you want me to come over? Chad offered. That would be a terrible idea, I said firmly. I don't blame you, we're both at fault, but I prefer never to see you again. I'll be professional at work, but outside of that, please don't contact me. Is that really how you feel about me? He asked. I love my husband deeply. I don't know why I did this with you, but it cost me everything I valued, my life with Steve and our children. I don't want reminders of my mistake. I understand, Chad said after a moment. But if you ever change your mind, I'm here. I don't give up on friends or lovers. Goodbye, Chad, I said, ending the call. Lovers. Apparently everyone but me saw it that way, but I never loved him, not for a moment. I only ever loved Steve, and now he would never believe that again. The weekend was horrible. Steve remained unreachable, and the kids grew increasingly restless. Trixie had 2 accidents on Friday night, and Katie had nightmares, ending up in bed with me on Saturday. Charlie, as always, remained stoic and strong, which only made me feel worse. I could sense his pain and embarrassment, and it wasn't long before it spilled over onto Steve. He must have been devastated, and I was the one who brought it all crashing down. Not just a tool, I was the hand wielding it. This was the man I had promised to love and cherish forever, and I had broken him without hesitation. I once read that everyone is the hero of their own story. I proved to be the exception. I'd been cruel to the one who should have mattered most, instead putting myself first. I wanted to run away, to disappear where no one could find me. It wouldn't change what I'd done, but at least I wouldn't have to face the daily judgment I deserved. But I couldn't. My children needed me to be fully present, no matter what. With Katie curled up next to me in bed, I resolved to be the best mother I could, pushing aside my grief, guilt, and regret to focus on caring for Charlie, Katie, and Trixie. I might not be Steve's wife anymore, but I could still be the best mom to our kids. When I woke up on Sunday morning, a new sense of determination filled me. I made waffles, bacon, and orange juice for the kids and settled them in front of the TV. Once I cleaned up the kitchen, I called Beth. She was the only member of Steve's family who would pick up, even if it was usually to scold me. What do you want now?
Beth snapped as she answered.
Good morning, Beth, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need you to tell Steve to see the kids. They really need him right now. I understand he doesn't want to see me, and I accept that, but the children need their father. He has to push his pain aside to show them that he loves them and reassure them that everything will be okay. Okay, you're insane, Beth shot back. What's going to be okay about any of this? I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to cry, and kept my composure. Steve isn't going to be okay for a long time, and I won't ever be okay again, I said, but the kids need to be, and Steve needs to help make that happen. I regret my actions more than anything, and I will carry that shame forever, but I'll put it aside for the children, and he needs to do the same. I don't expect him to forgive me or take me back, but the kids need their father, especially now. Beth's voice softened slightly as she responded, He hasn't been sober for more than 30 minutes at a time since he left on Monday. You have no idea what you've done to him. My heart ached as I replied. I do know. I know exactly what I did to him. I shattered our marriage and destroyed Steve. If ending my life could undo this, I would, but it won't. It won't fix anything or undo the pain for either of us. The only thing we can do now is focus on the kids. Paul, Margaret, Richard, you all need to help him realize this. I wish I could be the one to help, to stay by his side, but he has to find his way on his own, just as I do. Our children need to come first, and he has to see that. There was a long pause before Beth spoke again, this time more gently. I'll talk to Paul and our parents and see what they think. Thank you, Beth. It might sound impossible, but I do love Steve. I wish more than anything that I hadn't done this. I can't even explain why I did, but I did, And now I have to live knowing that I hurt the man I love. I'm not the woman I thought I was. Beth's voice was quiet, but her words stung. You're not the woman we thought you were either. That hurt, but I didn't cry. I felt emotionally numb. I channeled my energy into caring for my children, pushing away self-pity and guilt. I walked into the living room and gathered my kids to start Encanto again. After the movie, we grabbed a snack and headed to the park. When we returned, I quickly made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, sliced apples, and poured milk for lunch. I put Trixie down for her nap, set Katie up with crayons and coloring books, and let Charlie dive into his book about airplanes. Finally, with a quiet moment to myself, I checked my phone. No calls or messages. I knew what I needed to do. Hi, Mom, is Dad there with you? I asked. Hi, dear, yes, he's here somewhere. Do you need to talk to him? She replied. I need to talk to both of you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Okay, I think he's in the backyard. I'll find him. When will you and Steve bring the kids over? That question nearly broke me, but I pushed through. That's what I need to talk about, I said. Oh, is everything okay? Mom's voice wavered with concern. I need to speak to both you and Dad, I reiterated. All right, he's here now, she said. I could hear them fumble with the phone as they tried to put it on speaker, exchanging small, encouraging words. When they succeeded, they adored each other. I would never have that again. What's going on, honey? Dad asked. I took a deep breath. I wanted you to know that Steve has moved out. He found out that I had an affair. I don't know what comes next, but you needed to know. Silence filled the line. Are you in love with someone else? Mom's voice was strained. No, I said firmly. She let out a small, shaky sob. No, I love Steve. I love him so much. I don't know why I was with anyone else, I admitted. The silence returned, heavy and full of unspoken questions. Can you fix this? Dad finally asked. I don't think so. Steve left on Monday and hasn't responded to any of my messages. I don't know where he is. Beth says he's devastated and has been drinking all week, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Oh, that poor man, Mom whispered. My parents had always loved Steve. I closed my eyes, took a steadying breath, and continued. I know I'll regret what I did to him for the rest of my life, but I may need your help with the kids until things settle, whatever that might look like. Of course, dear Mom, she said softly, call us anytime. Dad says the kids can stay here whenever you need, and so can you. Their love remains steadfast, even when their child fails. The lump in my throat nearly choked me. Thank you, I love you both. We love you too, honey, Mom said, her voice full of warmth and worry. I cried for a long time after hanging up. I didn't deserve my parents' kindness, Steve, or my family, but they all needed me. So I had to be my best for them. This resolve was my anchor. I couldn't let myself collapse because the people I loved needed me, even if they no longer loved me back. Beth called me back. Steve wants to see the kids. You can bring them to our parents' house in an hour, she said. Thank you, Beth. They miss him so much, I replied. I hope seeing them helps him. He's completely broken, Beth said, her voice heavy with emotion. I know. He wants nothing to do with me, I said softly. But if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. I love him, and I'm here if he needs anything. Okay, she said before hanging up. The kids were overjoyed to see Steve and excited to visit their grandparents. Katie and Trixie bolted to the door as soon as I let them out of the car, but Charlie lingered. Aren't you coming? He asked. Not today. I have some things to take care of, but I'll be back soon, I replied. Okay, he nodded, serious as ever, and walked toward the house where Steve's mom waited to hug him.
She didn't look at me.
I drove home and cried again. The house felt suffocating and empty at the same time. Everything seemed smaller and more insignificant. Family photos felt like relics, frozen in time, as if in sepia. The furniture, books, DVDs, and video games seemed to belong to another era. I felt like I was wandering through a museum of my own life. I composed myself as best I could before heading back to pick up the kids. I barely recognized them. They were so quiet when Steve's mom brought them to my car, and the ride home was equally silent. Once inside, I made dinner, fried chicken, baked frozen fries, and chopped red peppers and carrots. I love my kids, but their diet was carb-heavy and limited. Changing that would have to wait for now. They needed comfort. Hardly anyone ate. Charlie went to his room, and I settled Katie and Trixie in front of the TV while I cleaned the kitchen. I was nearly finished when I noticed Katie standing in the doorway, watching me.
Mom, she said softly.
Yes, sweetheart, I replied, turning to her. Why is Daddy so sad? She asked, her eyes full of concern. What do you mean, honey? I said, trying to keep my voice calm.
He cried a lot, Katie said.
I think he was just happy to see us, but sometimes people cry when they're happy, right? You know, he loves you very much, I said, feeling a pang in my chest. I know, I said, but he still cried. I hugged her as regret washed over me again. I had shattered Steve's world. My love was the cornerstone of his life, and when it fell, everything collapsed around him. He couldn't even keep it together for the kids. I knew he would heal eventually, but how long would it take? I loved Steve with everything I had, and the pain I caused him was overwhelming. Maybe I could help him heal. I knew him better than anyone, but he wouldn't let me, and I couldn't blame him for that. Still, I couldn't stand by and watch him suffer. He didn't deserve this, and neither did our kids. My dad always said, if you break something, you have to fix it. That's exactly what I needed to do. I couldn't turn Steve back into the man he was before my betrayal, but I could help him move forward, even if he never accepted my help. I had two things working for me: our children and how well I knew him. Kids, do you know how sad your dad is? I asked. They nodded, their expression somber. I have some ideas to cheer him up. Want to hear them? Their eager nods almost brought tears to my eyes. They were amazing kids who adored their dad. What does your dad love to do most? I prompted. Tickle me, Trixie shouted, making us all laugh. He loves watching videos of us, Katie said, and Trixie added, he loves ice cream. I smiled, knowing I needed to guide them a bit further. He likes fishing, Charlie said quietly. Yes, and he loves you all so much. What else? I encouraged. He likes working in the garden, Charlie added thoughtfully.
Exactly.
Do you think he'd enjoy doing his favorite things with the people he loves most? They nodded again, eyes wide with anticipation. Next time you see him, could you ask if he wants to do some of those things with you? I asked. When will he come home, Mom? Katie's voice was small and hopeful. I don't know, honey, but you might see him at your grandparents' house soon. Now, who wants to take a bath first? I said, changing the subject with a smile. After the girls were tucked into bed and Charlie was lost in his book, I picked up the phone and called Bess. What do you want now? She answered, her voice tired and strained. Haven't you done enough? I know, Beth. I know what I did, and you and Steve didn't deserve any of it. But he needs to be with the kids. They need him, and he needs them too. We can help him start to heal, and that begins with spending time with the kids.
Why?
Why do you even care after what you did? Beth asked, her voice sharp with anger. I never meant to hurt him, even though I know it looks that way. I said, my voice trembling. I love Steve, I always have. I know we can't be together now, and maybe never again, and that breaks my heart. But I know what he needs to start healing, and I'll do whatever it takes to help, even if he never speaks to me again. Beth was silent, so I continued. I want him to see the kids every day. It could be at your parents' house or here. Here would be better. I can leave while he's here. Maybe we could even share the house, alternating weeks so the kids stay in their familiar environment. Their love could help him recover. He's going to divorce you, Beth said bluntly. The words cut deep, but I accepted the pain. I deserve that, I said. I figured, she replied, her tone sharp. And I'll grieve it for a long time, I admitted. But we need to help him for the sake of the kids. Please, Beth, help me help him. After a pause, Beth sighed. Fine. I'll tell him to see the kids and talk to Paul and our parents about sharing the house. It makes sense, but only if you're not there when he is. I understand, I said. I'll do anything except abandon my kids. I don't want to hurt him any more than I already have. Beth didn't respond, but the line clicked as she hung up. I took her silence as progress, better than the harsh reply I had expected. The next day at work felt surreal. I swapped procedures with Edna, so I wouldn't have to be near Chad, although we were both acutely aware of each other. No one else knew our world had unraveled last week, so everyone treated us, as they always did. Edna asked how the cruise went and laughed about Steve's confusion over her supposed involvement. He had called her to plan some gifts for me while I was on the trip and asked her to keep it a surprise. After she mentioned how he'd apologized for the misunderstanding, I forced a smile, saying I hadn't gone because I couldn't leave the kids. I added that it was still nice to take a break for the week. She told me how lucky I was to have such a thoughtful husband. I spent 10 minutes quietly crying in the bathroom. I picked up the kids on the way home and got them settled. I knew I was using TV too much to cope with the girls, but I promised myself to change that when the chaos of my life calmed down. I couldn't manage our usual games and activities at that moment. Our dinners were always simple, but I tried to sneak in healthy touches like pureed spinach and the spaghetti sauce. Today, frozen pizzas and a chopped apple would have to do. When the phone rang and I saw Beth's name, I took a deep breath before answering. Steve said he wants to see the kids, Beth began. He's open to alternating time at the house if he ever decides to speak to you. I told him it was my idea. If he knew it came from you, he would have rejected it right away.
Thank you, Beth, I said.
I don't care who gets credit. What matters is that Steve, Charlie, Katie, and Trixie reconnect and stay as whole as possible. When does he want to start? I asked. Tomorrow, Beth replied. The thought of spending a week with the kids seems to lift his spirits. He hasn't had anything to drink today. He's still sad, but thinking about the kids gives him some focus. I'm so grateful for your help, Beth, I said. Don't mention it, she said flatly. I mean it. So do I, and remember, if Steve ever finds out this was your idea, he'll cut me off. Beth warned. A bitter laugh escaped me. It was either that or break down completely. This was the biggest mistake of my life. I couldn't have done more damage to our family if I tried. Beth was silent for a moment, and I sensed her hesitation before she spoke. Why did you do it? I don't know, I said, my voice strained. It felt like an escape. Chad was friendly and paid attention to me, but I didn't even like him that much. I don't find him particularly attractive, but he saw me just as myself, not just as a wife or mother. He enjoyed spending time with me. The sex happened suddenly, without passion. It was just something to do. I destroyed my marriage for a few meaningless encounters and a cruise. I disconnected Chad from the rest of my life, and now it all feels disgusting and unreal. Now I have to live with the pain I caused Steve over something so empty. This is just so wrong, Beth said, her voice heavy with disbelief. I know, I whispered. There was another long pause before Beth spoke again. He talked to a lawyer. You'll get the divorce papers at work this week. I figured as much, I said, the finality sinking in. This is so wrong, she repeated. I couldn't agree more, I said, my heart breaking all over again. I pulled myself together and told everyone at work that Steve and I were divorcing, admitting that the problems were my fault. Everyone was shocked, except Chad, though he feigned surprise. Well, I wanted to get ahead of the news before people connected the dots. When they learned about his divorce, it was awkward at first, but the two dentists offered hugs and said they'd help by adjusting my hours as needed. It was comforting to feel at least a little support. The documents arrived on Thursday afternoon, and I brought them to my parents' house, where I stayed while Steve was with the kids. The divorce terms were harsh. Steve wanted 3/4 of our assets, the house, primary custody of the kids, child support from me, no child support from him, and for me to revert to my maiden name. I understood his anger and felt sadness all over again, but it wasn't practical for either of us. I knew Steve well enough to believe that once he healed, he'd regret such a punitive settlement. And if our kids were going to come through the divorce well, they needed to see us being civil. When I met my lawyer, I insisted on a fair proposal and made it clear that I wouldn't fight Steve. I accepted that our marriage was over and knew I couldn't ask for direct communication, though I longed to talk to him. We informed his lawyer that I would only respond if Steve initiated contact. He never did. I made no claim on his business and suggested an equal split of our other assets. I proposed we share the house on a rotating basis until Trixie finished school, then divide the property. Asked for joint custody, no child support from either side, and no spousal support. I planned to keep my married name until Trixie graduates, but if Steve insisted, I would revert to my maiden name. My lawyer was confident that I could push for more and tried to convince me to do so, but I held firm. There were a few half-hearted attempts by Steve's lawyer to negotiate better terms for him, but he knew I could also ask for more, so we eventually settled on what I had proposed. Living in the house without Steve felt strange, but the kids, especially the girls, adapted quickly. That was what mattered most. Charlie seemed more thoughtful than before, so through Beth's coordination, Steve and I agreed to take him to a therapist. He responded well, and although he never became the life of the party, he lightened up compared to how serious he was during the divorce. Beth managed our weekly transitions, showing up half an hour before either Steve or I left to ensure we didn't see each other. Steve never spoke to me directly, but he always maintained a strong presence for the kids. Most of the time, he removed all pictures of me and turned them face down in the office each week. I would put them back up and take them down again before heading to my parent house. He never spoke negatively about me to the kids and made sure they didn't hear anything bad from his family either. I respected his boundaries. I owed him more than that, but it was all he would let me do. I worked full-time at the clinic while my parents picked up the kids and stayed with them until I got home. During my weeks with the children, life felt incomplete, but I still had my kids, my parents, and my job, the things that kept me going. I chose not to date and didn't know if Steve was seeing anyone. I suspected he might be, as he was naturally good at relationships and had always been a caring partner. The first time Steve spoke to me after that day at the dock was at Katie's school play. I waited as he and his parents found seats, then sat on the opposite side of the multi-purpose room, just out of his line of sight, with Trixie beside me. Charlie was spending the evening with a friend after the performance. Trixie ran to her dad as soon as she saw him. I followed at a slight distance and stopped a few feet away. Steve picked her up, making her giggle. I smiled, seeing their bond. He glanced at me briefly, the way he always did when we were in the same space, and gave a small nod. I smiled back, my heart aching with the knowledge that I still loved him, even though we could never be together again. "We're thinking of taking Katie out for ice cream to celebrate her performance," he asked. "Can I take her?" "Of course," I replied. "Why not take Trixie too?" A faint, half-hearted smile crossed his face. "Thanks, we won't be out too late. I'll let Katie know to meet you by the stage. I need to pay for her costume. She was a mare, and she did so well," I said, pride evident in my voice. "Okay," he said, turning away with Trixie in his arms as he walked back to the stage with his parents. That was it. There was no warmth or tension between us. It felt as if he had moved past my betrayal. The realization left me both relieved and saddened. I knew he would eventually find someone new. In the classroom, I found Katie animatedly chatting with her friends, still wearing her costume. "You were amazing, sweetheart," I said with a smile. "Mom, I was so nervous," she admitted, her eyes wide with excitement. "I could tell, but you did wonderfully. Here, let me take your costume. Dad's waiting with Grammy and Poppy on the stage, and they're taking you and Trixie out for ice cream."
Yay.
"Are you coming?" she asked hopefully. "Not tonight, sweetie. I need to head home and clean up the kitchen," I said, giving her a reassuring hug. After dinner, I made sure Katie met up with Steve and his parents. They lavished her with attention, which made me smile. The kids were going to be okay. As I quietly slipped out, my throat tightened. There would be happiness ahead for both Steve and me, but likely not together, and not nearly as much as I'd thrown away with my poor choices. I hoped Steve would find love again. He deserved joy and peace after everything he'd been through, and I would need to find my own path to happiness as well. Life after the storm of my choices was different, but not devoid of growth. Days became weeks, and weeks turned into months, filled with the fragmented routine of co-parenting and silent exchanges at school functions or the rare birthday party. Steve's silence was a pain I carried daily, a silent testament to the trust that I had shattered. Yet, amidst the chaos of guilt and longing, I found moments of clarity. I worked hard to create a new sense of normalcy for the children, leaning into their laughter and the simple joys of their presence. Katie's endless stories about school, Trixie's toddler giggles when she showed me her crayon masterpieces, and Charlie's quiet resilience pulled me back into the present. They needed me to be whole, and through them, I found pieces of myself that hadn't been broken. On one rainy Saturday morning, while the kids were engrossed in a movie, I picked up my sketchbook, a relic of my college years with Steve. I hadn't drawn in ages, but with the rain tapping on the window and the scent of hot cocoa in the air, I let my pencil wander. Memories of us at the college art exhibit flooded back, Steve's voice in my ear as he explained why he loved the strokes of a painting. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, as if I could still feel his warmth beside me. As spring melted into summer, Steve and I settled into an unspoken routine. He would pick up the kids on Friday afternoons, and I would watch from the window as they left, holding back tears and hoping that one day we might exchange more than a nod. His interactions with the children were still as tender as ever, and for that, I was grateful. At least they hadn't lost their father's love. One afternoon, as I picked up Katie from a friend's house, the mother approached me. "You're doing really well, you know." "It can't be easy." Her words took me by surprise. I smiled politely, murmuring a thank you, but her words echoed in my head the whole way home. Was I really doing well? Perhaps not by my own standards, but I realized that I was trying, and for the kids, trying was everything. A few months after the school play, Beth called unexpectedly. "We're having a family picnic for Mom's birthday. Steve will be there, and the kids are excited. You should come." The invitation left me stunned, as if the world had paused for a heartbeat. Did this mean Steve was ready to face me, if only in a public setting? On the day of the picnic, I packed a simple salad and some homemade cookies, Steve's favorite, though I doubted he'd touch them. The park was lively, filled with laughter, and I watched from a distance as Steve tossed a frisbee to Charlie. His expression was relaxed, almost at peace. It was a fleeting glimpse of the man I had known and loved. Trixie ran up to me, her arms wide. "Mommy, come play." Her joy was infectious, and before I could decline, Steve caught my eye. He didn't smile, but there was no anger in his gaze, only a neutral acknowledgement. It was the most he had offered in months, and I took it as a lifeline. For a while, we were just parents playing with our kids in the park, the past a ghost that stayed just out of reach. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Steve approached me while the kids played with their cousins. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, looking past me at the horizon. His voice was strained but sincere. I nodded, my heart pounding, unable to form a coherent response. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The following week saw more small exchanges, updates about the kids, brief discussions about schedules. They were transactional, yet carried a weight of possibility. It wasn't until Charlie's birthday that Steve surprised me. As we lit the candles on the cake, he turned to me and said, "Would you like to join us for dinner this weekend?" Just dinner. My breath caught, and I saw the flicker of hope in Charlie's eyes. "Yes," I whispered, barely trusting my voice. "I'd like that." Dinner that Saturday was filled with tentative conversation, stories about work and the kids. It wasn't an apology to her, and it wasn't a rekindling of love. It was two people navigating the shards of what once was. Steve's gaze never lingered, but it wasn't filled with hurt anymore, and that, for now, was enough. In time, life would continue to challenge us both. Perhaps Steve would find someone who could love him without betrayal, and maybe I would discover how to forgive myself. But for now, we were parents who loved our children and found a fragile peace in that shared purpose. As I tucked the kids into bed that night, Katie whispered, "Is Daddy staying here?" I kissed her forehead and said, "No, sweetie, not tonight." But deep inside, I knew that wherever Steve was, he would always be part of this home, this family, even if it wasn't the same as before.